Blessed Feast of the Most Holy Trinity. For those of you who pray along with the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, in accordance to Sister Lucia's declaration that praying the Little Office and wearing the brown scapular were required for living the Fatima message, which is not covered by the Sabbatine privilege, by the way, then this is the day where during Compline you change your prayer setting at the end. So be advised on that. Now, that having been said, today is, of course, a feast day, and I have in my my normal educational recording today a homily from Dom Prosper Garinger, which will be live in about an hour. Channel members had early access to it, and one told me this morning that they thought it was particularly beautiful. So please check that out when it is available to the public. Sundays are always a little lighter. I always try to save like a letter from a bishop for a Sunday if possible. And we have one of those today. This is from Bishop Agur, who is the Bishop Emeritus of La Plata, Argentina. He was sort of the verbal sparring partner of then Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio. He, whenever the future Francis would take a heterodox position on something, which was frequent, Archbishop Agur would take the Catholic position and argue against him. And when he reached the mandatory retirement age for a bishop he submitted his retirement letter to Rome, his resignation letter to Rome, which was then headed by Francis by the time that happened. And within hours, it had been accepted and he was sent packing. Compare that to Cardinal Supich, who 2 months ago hit that mandatory retirement age, submitted his letter, and it has not been accepted. Take that into consideration. He has a letter here, and I will follow it with some lighter material. We're going to go dive into some letters to the editor from a very, very infamous Catholic news outlet, mostly because it will be amusing, I think, to everybody to read some of this stuff. But here we are. We start with from LifeSite. Archbishop Agur, Pope Francis's Vatican has adopted the ideology of the French Revolution. We'll fix this here so everybody can see it better. Got to get better about that. The Holy See, to the envy of universal stonecuttery, has adopted the ideology of the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Where has it filed away Jesus' command to Peter in the 11 to make all peoples his disciples? Yeah, that's a good question. In all this ecumenical dialogue, which I'm going to wade into some stormy waters for next weekend by recording something that will tell people who ask questions about things like, can I play the organ at a Protestant service, and things like that. I'll be diving into what the church used to teach about that stuff. And lost in all this ecumenical dialogue is this question: where has the Vatican filed away Jesus' command to Peter in the 11 to make all peoples his disciples? It's a good question. Why has the Vatican turned away, and it's not just under Francis, but his predecessors, from the spirit of evangelization, real evangelization, calling people to come home to the church, to convert? And the answer to that is because you started getting some really weird reorienting of the church on that question specifically at Vatican II. And remember, Francis tells us it's his job to change or to fully implement Vatican II. That's why things are so weird in the church now. But here is Archbishop Hector Agur on this. Pope summons 30 Nobel Prize winners to reflect on fraternity, reads a La Prensa headline of a story from the outlet EFE. It refers to the recent World Meeting on Human Fraternity, whose theme was Be Human. The objective was, quote, to elaborate a new worldwide pact of fraternity and a new code of the human being, in addition to announcing a great event on fraternity during the Holy Year Jubilee to be celebrated in 2025. The guest list included Guatemalan indigenous leader Rigoberta Menchú, NASA Director Bill Nelson, New York Mayor Eric Adams, and Mozambican activist Graca Machel, who is also the widow of Nelson Mandela. Efforts will be made to design concrete proposals to begin to change history, to stimulate the reforms that are lacking, and to understand where the principle of fraternity is already present in social life, and to discern the necessary parameters to measure it, explained the Holy See, which added that on May 11th, in the only event to be held in the small state, Bergoglio will receive the participants in a private audience. The Holy See, to the envy of universal stonecuttery, has adopted the ideology of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Where has it filed away Jesus' command to Peter in the 11 to make all peoples his disciples? meaning Christians. The successor of Peter is unfortunately the one leading the Church of Rome on this wrong path that the whole church must follow. There is a way to react according to tradition. The Apostle Paul reproached Peter for his hypocrisy because he ate with those who came from paganism but began to try to influence the old pact when James, cousin of the Lord and head of the Church of Jerusalem, arrived. In the letter to the Galatians, Paul said, I resist him to his face, and calls his behavior hypocrisy. Tradition has given the Roman pontiff the highest authority, but the cardinals, with all due respect, can make him aware of the dangers of Rome adopting the dogma of the revolution, something the popes have not done since Gregory XVI, who energetically condemned the contagion of liberalism in his encyclical Mirari Vos. As an aside, I have Mirari Vos on this channel if you want to listen to it. We must remember Pius XI, his encyclical Quanta Curia, and the Syllabus of Errors. The magisterium of Pius XII and his successors also stands out. The Church has been reformulating and updating its doctrine without violating its roots in tradition. John Paul II extensively expressed the path of the Church on the occasion of its entry into the 21st century. At the World Meeting on Human Fraternity, Pope Francis, receiving the participants in the audience, said, on a planet up in flames, you gathered with the intention of reaffirming your no to war and your yes to peace, bearing witness to the humanity that unites us. The meeting was attended by personalities from the world of science, politics, art, and sport. They reflected on human fraternity and how to build a peaceful world in the future. In his speech, the Supreme Pontiff quoted Martin Luther King Jr. We have learned to fly like birds, to swim like fish, but we have not yet learned the simple art of living together as brothers. He also insisted that the key word for living together is compassion. The intention of the encounter was to generate a movement of fraternity. It is necessary to recognize each other again in common humanity and put fraternity at the center of the life of peoples, the Pope said. The great absentee in all this is Jesus Christ. To judge what this absence means, it is enough to recall the work of St. Paul, especially his letters to the Ephesians and to the Colossians. Christ is everything for the Church. I am reminded of two significant expressions of Paul VI. We had hoped for a flourishing spring, but a harsh winter has come. And it seems that through some crack the smoke of Satan has entered the Church of God. The pontiff thus expressing his disenchantment after the Second Vatican Council. There is a true fraternity among Christians. Paul frequently uses the term brothers to refer to the addressees of his letters. It is a mystery of grace founded on the one baptism which we confess in the Creed and which demands charity in mutual behavior. Evangelization is the process that extends the Church as fraternity. It can be said to be expressed in the Lord's Prayer, where we call God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, our Father, with a plural that excludes individualism. From the Christian point of view, we can analogically consider all men as brothers insofar as they are creatures of God, who is the only creature of all and the Father of souls. This is an occasion to recall that Peter is the head of the process of evangelization in which the nascent church was engaged. Saul, who became Paul, joined him. The apostle to the Gentiles reminds us that there is no other gospel than the one entrusted to the 11. What happens is that there are some who distort the gospel of Christ, contaminating it with otherness, if we can call it that. The person of Peter finds continuity in his successors, the popes of Rome. I am reminded of St. Bernard's words to Pope Eugene III, who had been his disciple. What did your predecessors have in mind to interrupt evangelization while unbelief is still spreading? For what reason has the word that runs swiftly adopted? Remember that you owe it not only to Christians, but also to infidels and to our elder brothers, Greeks and pagans. The dogma of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, is another gospel that spreads unbelief, the forgetfulness of Jesus Christ, the word of the Father. The successor of Peter and the whole church cannot adopt it or make a pact with it in a false peace. The word that runs swiftly must not stop. As a continuity of Christ's redemptive work, the church's mission is directly to the consecration of the world. This concept covers a double reality. On the one hand, the good world, the work of God's creation, and on the other, a kind of second nature. As Blaise Pascal said, the world of sin, vanity, and lies, the alienation of man, the sphere in which the action of the enemy unfolds. This world must be torn away from evil and led to God by the Word, who is Christ. This is also the mission of the successor of Peter and of the whole community of the faithful. Its price is the cross of Christ and the readiness of the disciples to martyrdom. A question remains open about the destiny of Israel and the preaching to our elder brothers in the midst of a mission that was aimed at procuring the conversion of pagans from the beginning. But the mysterious paganization of the Christian world must be taken into account. The position of the church vis-a-vis the French Revolution's dogma must be placed in this theological context. Signed, Hector Agur, Archbishop Emeritus of La Plata, Argentina. The church's evangelization must be placed in the context of the post-French Revolution world that we live in. He's absolutely right about that. Nobody ever thinks about that. Nobody thinks about how the world dramatically changed in 1789. It was completely upended. And the church, for whatever reason, in the 1960s, decided to play nice with that world, to open the windows of the church to the world for some fresh air. He's not wrong there. And of course, absent in all this is our blessed Lord, who commanded us to spread the gospel to all nations and to baptize people, to baptize everybody, to baptize all nations. Why has the church stopped with that? There's something to pray on today, I think, on Trinity Sunday. Now we will shift briefly, because on Sundays we also like to keep the live stream short because it's Sunday. Okay, so I have for you some letters to the editor from two sources. First is from the National Catholic Reporter. I stumbled across this by accident, and boy, I'm glad I did. I think I'm going to make this a regular thing here on this channel on Sundays or something, where we like to keep things a little light. Your letters, Harrison Butker, Traditionalism and Tradwives. This is going to be, these letters are fantastic. These are from normal people, the normal readers of the National Catholic Reporter. Remember, the National Catholic Reporter will not usually hide what it's doing, because its core mission, its core readership are people who think like the authors of the National Catholic Reporter. So the first letter. Butker wouldn't recognize Christ's masculinity. Having just read Madison Chastain's "Stay in Your Lane," by the way, that's a response to Harrison Butker's statement that is written by a radical's radical. They says KC football player far outside of his lane. I was impressed by Chastain's careful analysis of Harrison Butker's commencement speech at Benedictine College, especially concerning Butker's contradictory remarks that urged the graduates to be good Catholics, while in the same breath demeaning the authority of the bishops. But what Chastain does not remark on is Butker's message to the male graduates, telling them to be unapologetic in your masculinity and to fight against the cultural emasculization of man. What would he have thought of Jesus, who went against the cultural norms of his day by not marrying, by engaging women in long conversations, by standing with the woman taken in the act of adultery, and eating and drinking with sinners? For Harrison Butker, Jesus would have been a sign of contradiction. No, because Jesus was the Son of God. And most of the precepts that Jesus, quote, violated were the laws that were written by man, those traditions of men that he spoke about that separated man from God, that had been tolerated because of the hardness of man's heart. That's why Jesus' supreme command is to love one another. And every single thing here that he lists is an act of love, especially when he was eating and drinking with sinners or talking with the woman in question. Though the core, everything, whenever Jesus surrounded himself with sinners, you know what the purpose of it was? To call them to conversion. That's what it was. It wasn't to just be nice to the sinners. It was to call them to conversion. Go forth and sin no more. It's the first of these letters. Now a warning about traditionalism. Don't underestimate traditionalism's impact. Having read the original AP article, which this editorial speaks to, I believe the AP article is spot on. At 65, I've relocated across the country 9 times. I grew up in the Detroit diocese in the 60s and find myself in the rural St. Paul, Minnesota diocese. I need to drive 20 miles each way to attend a parish which I consider mainstream. Pause there. How many traditional Catholics like myself drive a long distance to find a traditional parish? This is literally like the mirror universe version of this, if you're familiar with the mirror universe in Star Trek. This is a person who drives a long distance to find what they call a mainstream parish, which means a National Catholic Reporter style parish. In the local parish, less than 2 miles from home, we continue to kneel for communion, have Latin placards in the pews, and have a priest who was a top story for MSP News for an anti-redacted homily he gave on the day the diocese defined as a movement Sunday, and yes, he is still there. So there's a Reverend Novus Ordo near him, and he drives 20 miles to get away from it. Your editorial fails to recognize this rapidly growing movement of anti-Pope Francis, anti-Vatican II Catholics, and fail to take advantage of the groundwork laid by the AP article to expose the real threat this movement poses to the U.S. and the worldwide church. Traditionalism is a threat to the country. You need to travel through small and mid-sized communities and see just how much U.S. Catholicism is devolving. You missed a chance to send a wake-up call, which is unfortunate for those of us in the shrinking cohort of mainstream Catholics. I'll take that as an endorsement of everything we're doing, folks. Please, whatever it is you're doing in your daily lives as traditionally minded Catholics, to have the authentic faith that had been taught by our forebears until about 60 years ago, to have that restored, keep it up. It's having an impact. And then a response. The National Catholic Reporter had an article on tradwives, and this is a response to that article. Stay-at-home motherhood is not the problem. No one needs to be concerned about the rise of tradwives in rural America or anywhere else. For those who welcome and enjoyed that role, more power to them. As for their desire to homeschool their youngsters, I offer my deepest admiration and heartiest congratulations. In small rural communities such as mine, the homeschooled youngsters are always easy to spot. Socially confident, friendly, articulate, polite, and focused achievers. Most of the teens are very active in their church communities and happily integrate into the public school athletic programs and advanced learning classes at their community colleges. Some of these students transition easily to some of the best universities in America. What's not to like? There's so much to be said about a return to an old-fashioned pre-Vatican II lifestyle that does not include the Latin Mass. There's their caveat. As a stay-at-home Catholic mother of 8, I have been there and done that, having been on record for changing and washing approximately 32,000 cloth diapers between the years 1960 and 1978. However, this lifestyle is not for everyone. If really chosen with mutual commitment from both parents, it can ultimately be a joy. But if a Catholic wife is caught up in a Marian, a word I can't use on YouTube, found that out the hard way, that suggests her complete submission to possible stressful demands from her husband and or spiritual community, it could become fertile ground for bad things. In other words, very un-Mary-like. I think we'll stop there with these letters from them. There is actually a lot of truth to that. Any young man and woman watching this, please, part of your marriage preparation should be communication, making sure that you and your potential spouse are on the same page as to your expectations of what your marriage will be like. My wife and I did that. It didn't take much. We found out very quickly we were on the same page. You should be on the same page about that, because otherwise you're going to be in for a bad time. It's not funny. I laugh because I laugh whenever someone has to say something obvious like that, but it's true. Now, in that letter, they talk about returning to a pre-Vatican II way of living that does not involve the Latin Mass. For whatever reason, the National Catholic Reporter's audience is very, very, very hostile to that. And I have some insight into here from another source, a letter to the editor that was published by Joseph Shaw to the Tablet. I'm going to start checking their website for these. Joseph Shaw, if you're not familiar with him, is the chairman of the Latin Mass Society. And here he shows a letter that was sent to the Tablet, very, very short, expressing concern about all the new people who come into the church after Easter or at Easter, and wondering if they have been catechized into synodality, if you can believe that. The Synodal Church and the Catholic Church are not really the same thing. There's a lot of overlap. You see those Venn diagrams with the circles where there's overlap. There's overlap, sure, but they're not the same. In their structure, they're not the same. In what they preach, they're certainly not the same. That's what the point of starting with this Francis letter from Hector Agur was about. They're not the same. So here's the letter. So what have our new converts been taught about synodality? What explanations have they received as to why, as they embrace the precious sacrament of reconciliation, millions of their fellow Catholics have voted with their feet and will never again darken a confessional door? What understanding do they now have of the facts that, in the absence of the abolition of compulsory celibacy and with no indication of change in the position regarding the ordination of women, the Eucharistic community they have embraced will probably not outlast their lifetimes? That's a letter from Ireland. The Tablet's out of the UK. Let's talk about that for a second. There are people out there, again, People don't believe me when I say that the modernists, many of them, are true believers in what they're doing. They honestly believe God sent them to change the church, to save the church, that they are being guided by the Holy Spirit. They honestly believe that. They believe in a modernist version of the Protestant heresy of the Babylonian captivity. If you're not sure what the Babylonian captivity is, yes, there's a reference to a Babylonian captivity, obviously in the Old Testament. That's not what they're talking about. They believe that Jesus founded a church, that the apostles went out and did their thing, and then at some point early in the church went off the rails, and that the real gospel was driven underground, and that it took King James and Martin Luther basically to reestablish the gospel. That's what the Protestants believe. The modernists believe all of that is true except for the Protestant part, although they believe the Protestants were on the right track, and that it took the Second Vatican Council to reestablish the church, by the modernists taking over the Second Vatican Council. They believe that. They are true believers of that. And you see this here in this, where they believe that the church will go away if priests are allowed, or if priests are not allowed to get married, or if women are not allowed to be ordained. They believe that. They're true believers in that stuff. So pray for all of those people who believe that stuff. I have a video for you coming in the coming days that will make people like this have nightmares and have to question everything that they believe on this. All the data shows unequivocally the young priests reject the Synodal Church. Watch that video tomorrow. It will make you smile. We'll wrap this up here in a minute. Let me take a look at what the live chat has to say about all of this stuff, because I'm very curious what you have to say about these letters to the editor, Bishop Hector Agur's letter, all of it. So let's take a look here at the live chat. We had a well-attended marriage conference here at St. Ignatius. Good, and I hope communication was part of it. I really do. Let's take a look. It's hard to listen to some of these letters. I simply can't relate to their POV. We're like, again, we talk about how Catholic prophecy, many of the just intelligent nonprofits, Fulton Sheen and a few others, they talked about how there would come a time when there would be an ape of the church. They could see it coming just by logic, and that they would occupy the same space. That's what we're seeing. See that all the time. Non-believers hold God demand standards. We live in dumb times. Yeah, we do. Talk about confusions in thoughts, praying daily for the conversion and illumination of conscience. Yes. Pray for the conversion of sinners. That's what we have to do, without becoming too puffed up ourselves. You don't want to become the Pharisee that they accuse us of being. You don't want to do that. All right, folks. Good lively chat here. Pretty good attendance, too, for a Sunday morning. So we're going to wrap this up here because I have to get ready for Mass. Please pray for everybody who were affected by the storms in Oklahoma last night. By the grace of God, the storms launched early in the day in northwest Texas, unfortunately for the people there. But it did rob the storms of a lot of the energy they needed to really do what the National Weather Service was afraid of. And so by the grace of God, it was not nearly as bad as it was, although Claremore, Oklahoma was hit by a tornado last night. So that they're in the far northeast corner of the state. So they had time to recharge. And those storms are ongoing right now. So please pray for everybody affected by those storms last night. I've spoken to my confessor about my doing live streams on Sundays, and they basically told me it was fine. So especially since I tend to keep them kind of light, like letters and these kinds of things. But thanks for make sure to pray for everybody that I asked you to pray for. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.